Well, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, and welcome to Studying God's Word. I am Pastoral Intern Colin Newharth, serving Trinity Lutheran Church and Grace Lutheran Church in Bismarck and Driscoll, respectively. And welcome and grace and peace to you. This week's gospel text is taken from the 5th chapter of Mark. And before we dive in, a few things we must understand about the Gospel of Mark. First of all, it's a very, I like to think of it as a very no-nonsense way of writing the Gospel. It's very short, sweet, to the point. Jesus did that, and then he moved on. Also, it's almost a kind of a secretive gospel as well, because throughout the gospel readings in Mark, we see that Jesus makes it clear to those who witness his miracles that he wants it to remain a secret, that they don't want the word spread that he can do these things. And so we are in Mark chapter 5, starting with the 21st verse and going to the 43rd verse. And we essentially have multiple different stories in this one passage. And that's, again, expressing that sort of urgency, that sort of getting down to business type of style of Mark, as well as scholars have kind of called that, they've given the term intercalation. And I know that's a scientific term more in the world of chemistry where molecules infiltrate each other or something. I'm not in science, so those of you out there who know more about that can clear things up with me later. But theological scholars use that term to describe this passage and other passages in Mark, where we have like two or three different stories, two or three different interactions of Jesus, two or three different miracles of Jesus in one gospel reading. So that's where we're at today. So we'll start with verse 21. So we're finding Jesus is still crossing the Sea of Galilee. You might notice that we left off from last week where Jesus calmed the storm. He's still in the boat going to the other side. And right as he's getting to the other side, a great crowd had gathered around him. And he was by the sea. So Jairus, one of the leaders of the synagogue, came and fell to his feet and begged him repeatedly. He said, "My daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." All right, so this is the first little story inside of a story, so to speak, story inside of a reading. And we must understand that at this point, Jesus has, as secretive as Jesus wants to be, and as secretive as Mark says that Jesus is trying to be, Jesus has a reputation now. And he has a reputation for healing and miracles and teaching and all sorts of these things. So Jairus comes up to him and is desperate for his daughter to be made well. So then, starting at verse 24, Jesus goes with Jairus. And again, this large crowd keeps following him, again with the reputation thing. And this crowd is so large that they're pressing in on him. There's like no room to walk or speak or anything like that. So now we're coming up to the second of the story inside of a story type of thing. and it is the story of the hemorrhaging woman. So now in verse 25, there was a woman in this crowd who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years, some sort of health problem. We don't entirely know. So, and it says she had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but she has rather grown worse. We got to understand that 2,000 years ago, medical science was obviously not what it is today. It was very, very primitive. And so when people would seek healing in conventional ways, if you want to call it that, a lot of times they would either their condition would worsen or they would die. So it's really no surprise that this woman is very, very desperate for healing. And so in verse 27, it says, she had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. And she said, if I but touch the clothes, I will be made well. Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed from her disease. Again, another story inside of a story, another miracle from Jesus, another his reputation kind of is starting to precede him because people are starting to seek out Jesus and follow him, literally follow him, because from this point on in Mark, it always seems that Jesus has a fan club following him, like a great crowd keeps on following him. So then in 30, so this woman kind of surprises Jesus, I think, because it says in verse 30, immediately aware that the power had gone forth from him. So Jesus felt something. He felt like, I like to call it, he sensed a disturbance in the force, so to speak. And so Jesus turns around into the crowd and he says, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say who touched me? It was more, the disciples are more like, look, Jesus, who hasn't touched you? Let's be honest here. So he, in the sense of touching his cloak, wanting to, it's kind of chaotic here, really. You see the crowd is pressing in on you. How can you say who touched me? So it says he looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said, so she said, look, Jesus, I did it. It was me. And so Jesus says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So that's very powerful intersection of faith and Jesus there. Because Jesus doesn't say, I made you well. Jesus doesn't say, my powers made you well. Jesus does not say, he doesn't point it back to him at all in those words. He points it back to faith, pushing again the point that the belief in Jesus Christ is that power that comes to us, that love and that forgiveness and that grace that comes to us. Not Jesus, the person himself, but our faith in the risen Christ that makes us well. And so that's the point of that there. The distinction. So there's a big distinction between what's divine and what's human. Because this woman touched something that was very palpable, something of Jesus that was very distinct and palpable. And then Jesus, and she was cured. And then Jesus says, "It was your faith that made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And so she went on her way. So that's story number 2 within inside of a story. So while he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house, so I believe Jairus' house here. And they said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" They're like, they're basically saying, "Give it up. This happened. It's a done deal." But Jesus was overhearing this conversation. And Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." So he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion and people weeping and wailing. It wasn't good because everybody thought this girl was dead. And so when Jesus had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make such a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And picture it this way. Imagine walking into a funeral home, because when back in Jesus' time, the rituals for taking care of the dead and burying of the dead took place in everybody's individual homes. There weren't funeral homes, but I'm putting this in a very modern context here. Imagine you're at a funeral home for a loved one who had died, and then some guy comes in and says, "Why are you crying? They're just sleeping." And for me personally, my first thought is, well, that sounds kind of ridiculous because they were at the funeral. We're at the funeral. And this is sad, and it's kind of a done deal right now. So they weren't laughing at him like a ha 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 kind of thing. They were laughing at him as like, how ridiculous, do you know how ridiculous you're sounding right now? And so then he put them all outside. He said, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." And took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately she woke up and began to walk around. And she was only 12. It specifies it here. And everybody was overcome with amazement. And he strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So closing out this this reading here, this gospel for this Sunday, is again that secretive thing. Like he strictly ordered them to tell no one about this, because it was the power of Jesus through faith, through the grace and forgiveness through faith, that these miracles happened. And so in Mark's style, Jesus is being secretive again and then moving on his way. I hope this gives you a few things to think about for this week. There's a lot of stuff to unpack, so don't feel like you need to unpack every single thing in Mark's gospel reading this week. But it just shows the power of faith, hope, and love through Jesus Christ. And that's our study for this week. Thank you for joining me. Have a blessed day.